Broadcasting from Boston, Massachusetts, the ARC Digital Transformation Viewpoints podcast is the only podcast dedicated to all things related to digital transformation in energy, industrial, and critical infrastructure applications. The podcast is the creation of the ARC Advisory Group Digital Transformation Practice. ARC advises leading companies on technology trends and market dynamics that affect their business. To engage further, please like and share our podcasts or reach out directly on Twitter at ARC_advisory, or please go to the website at www.arcweb.com.
Hello, everybody. This is Marianne DiAquila from ARC Advisory Group. I'm a director of research, and I work in our digital transformation group, and one of my coverage areas is industrial analytics. Today, I'm fortunate enough to be speaking with Brian Saunders from SAS. He is a global director and head of IoT industry consulting. Brian, would you like to give yourself a brief introduction?
Thank you, Marianne. Brian Saunders, 25 plus years in industry, primarily focused on the industrial sector, manufacturing, transportation, and energy. Mechanical engineering background, so I'm not a data scientist. So you're going to, even though I work for SAS, you're going to get more of the practitioner's view in today's podcast.
Thank you for that, Brian. Brian, SAS is a leader in the industrial analytics space. As part of your engagement with global manufacturing, transportation, and energy companies, what would you say are some of the key initiatives being pursued to drive new operational efficiencies?
Yeah, I think we can all agree that the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning has become foundational to overall organizational growth strategies in recent years. And really, the challenges that they're being applied to really haven't, shifted in a lot of ways. They've remained consistent over the years. I think that, across all of those industry sectors, they have some unique challenges, whether they be manufacturing quality or sort of better preparing for the energy transition and the strains on the grid that renewable generating assets are producing, or transportation management systems to alleviate congestion in our cities, et cetera. But I think one common theme, if I were to see a few things that are common across each of those sectors, predictive maintenance. We continue to see heavy investment there, but not really from a reticence to adopt, but more how do they focus on at-scale deployments, doing so across their growing enterprises and industrial asset portfolios. Another area, I think organizations are continuing to try to figure out ways to drive new revenue streams and better manage risk for their business. So certainly this evolution of connected products, trying to capitalize on the aftermarket, is also quite prevalent across all of those subsectors you mentioned. And, I mentioned the problems have kind of remained the same or somewhat consistent. But I think the evolution of IoT has given rise to really new approaches and technology that has enabled organizations to maybe better address those challenges.
Maybe we could follow up with that just a little bit more on the comment around new technology and approaches. Can you provide some additional context or an example that reflects the shift?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's a lot of buzz and certainly rightfully so around ubiquitous connectivity and streaming analytics. They tend to dominate the amplification in the market. But I think what we're seeing a lot of kind of new investment is the movement away from sort of the traditional structured data to unstructured data processing. Really, the emergence of computer vision is a very practical example. Being able to leverage that new compute, edge processing, and computer vision modeling improvements over the years to tackle problems such as visual inspection of product on a manufacturing line, or asset inspection of wind turbines in a distributed farm, or worker safety across many of the manufacturing and energy environments. So I certainly see kind of a new emerging focus on these sort of non-standard data streams, but I think they are paying big dividends across industry.
Excellent examples. Thank you. Now, looking across the industries, we're seeing, at least from my perspective, varying degrees of success as organizations look to roll out industrial analytic initiatives. What are some of the key challenges that you are seeing?
I think the biggest challenge that I think the impediment for organizations that have struggled, they haven't aligned initiatives to value. And if you don't have a laser focus in connecting sort of the investments you're making and the journey that you're starting to a tangible and quantifiable business value, I think things tend to stall. You tend to get organizational fatigue, frustration, usually because timelines and cost have been inflated. So that's usually the biggest impediment to get started. Those that have actually believe they have a solid value story, I believe the ability to deploy and operationalize analytic insights back into an enterprise, really deploying this intelligence at the right level of the enterprise to capture value, whether that be at the edge or in the cloud or anywhere in between, that continues, I think, to be a big hurdle. Certainly, we've made a lot of investments within SaaS to make that journey a bit easier and simplify sort of the analytic integration to standard sort of business tools, processes, and equipment. And so certainly that I think that challenge is getting easier, but I still see that as a big hurdle for many organizations.
Brian, next I'd like to speak with you about, we interviewed Georgia Pacific about their journey with real-time analytics and computer vision. What can you share from your perspective as the provider who has been partnering with them on their journey that could serve as a roadmap for others that are either just starting or advancing their digital transformation journey?
Yeah, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Georgia Pacific since they started this journey back in 2018. And I can honestly say across industry, you won't find many examples, if any, that are doing it better. I think their starting point, they focused on value. I mentioned that before as one of the reasons why organizations aren't successful. They were laser focused on what they were trying to do to transform their business. The next kind of, I think, element of their success was they really focused on small incremental wins. They have this mantra that good is good enough. They weren't seeking perfection from their phase one investments. And they realized that even if it's 50% better than the old way of doing things, that's 50% of the surface area they don't have to apply resources to. So that's driven lots of operational efficiency for them. And I think they realize that this is more than really a technology play. This has to do with organizational structure. They subscribe to this concept that analytics is a team sport, and it's imperative that their subject matter experts and data scientists work collaboratively to really tackle these problems that are pervasive across their manufacturing enterprise. And ultimately, they've invested heavily in change management practices, overcoming some of those challenges of adoption, and they're working very closely with their business partners to ensure that they are serving up the insights at the right time and the right manner so that actions are actually taken across the enterprise. And they've really focused on the technology as well. They continue to try to drive efficiencies and improvements to drive growth and scale and repeatability across the enterprise. So they've certainly tackled it from a organizational and technology footprint.
And, Brian, what I was really impressed with when I spoke with them was they started their journey with you in, I believe, 2018. And here we are several years later, and their patience has really paid off. By taking those bite-sized pieces over time and never losing sight of the business problem at hand, They were able to deploy continuous learning processes and develop even more mature models. And they've really achieved some impressive quantifiable results. And I really stress the quantifiable results portion because that's what we're hearing, that people want to, over time, how do I know that I've succeeded? Well, they have a 30% reduction in their downtime, and they have a 10% improvement in their OEE. They've implemented computer vision and have a much better worker safety record. So linking the technology to the business process outcomes is what it's all about. And I believe that Georgia Pacific and SAS has really nailed that. They probably, to me, this is probably one of the best examples that we can turn to when we look at successful implementations of industrial analytics. Let's talk about the evolution and growth of industrial ecosystems from an IT, OT, and engineering perspective. How has your company embraced this opportunity?
At the beginning, we mentioned that I'm part of the IoT division, and our focus is really on the expansion of our ecosystem around the SaaS technologies that we bring to market. And we for 45 plus years have been laser focused on data-driven insights and outcomes, but we realize in this complex environment that we're working within, in order for folks to achieve some of the results like you just referenced for Georgia Pacific, it requires broader collaboration and integration of technologies beyond just the analytic swim lane, from sensors to edge hardware and gateways to communication systems, data storage technologies, cloud services. All of those things have to work in combination to really unlock this value. And so our goal has been to expand our presence and relevance across ecosystems so that we can more seamlessly integrate within our customers' environments, really taking advantage of those investments they may have already made. We want this to be as decoupled of a design thinking as possible so that, again, we can plug in and augment some of those investments. If they haven't made investments, certainly we can offer the broader full stack solutions as well. And I would say probably the biggest area of focus is we talk about low latency decisions, outcomes, but if those insights that drive them don't tie into existing systems, decision support platforms that a customer has invested in, no one knows about them, and therefore no actions get taken, and that value continues to be quite elusive in those scenarios. So we've sort of looked at this from how do we address the market and engage in more meaningful ways to make that customer journey a bit easier, but also amplify and extend the value of what SaaS has been bringing for 45 plus years.
And, from our side, we have done numerous surveys on end users on this topic. And what we have found is those who are truly leaders are breaking down silos across these particular groups from operations and engineering perspectives. As we're coming down to the end of our podcast here, I can't help but have to have a question about all the buzz around generative AI. So would you mind sharing the SaaS perspective on the impact it could have or is having in the industrial sector?
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting to see sort of this monumental shift in the narrative towards generative AI. I don't think we're questioning, or anyone would be questioning, the value that this type of technology evolution is going to have on industry. But I think the question that I wrestle with is, when will that happen? And in my mind, it boils down to trust. When will you have the trust in the technology and these analytic methods to turn over your enterprise? Certainly from a SaaS perspective, we always talk about trustworthy AI. It's a cornerstone for who we are and how we believe data and analytics should be adopted in the most reliable and trustworthy way. As part of that, that's really sort of shaping our generative AI strategy and how I think it's going to be adopted within industry. From large language models to synthetic data generation to digital twins, I think we're seeing pockets of adoption. I think probably the most tangible and immediate adoption is really through code generation or co-pilots to help with decisioning, sort of the day-to-day, make life easier for someone to ingest lots of data. Just take a maintenance example, since I've mentioned that was common across these industries. Taking in machine operating data and maintenance manuals and historic failures and technician notes, distilling all that together and making it easily mineable so that a digital assistant can kind of give guidance when a machine starts to drift. What are the 3 things you must do to correct that and keep it running and healthy at peak operability and performance? So I think we're seeing that. I don't think we're quite ready to make that full transition to autonomous operations quite yet, but certainly I'm very excited about what the future does hold as this technology continues to evolve and continues to improve, I think, in terms of accuracy.
Also, what I think we're seeing here too is as the workforce, as challenges continue to arise, whether it be the aging workforce or just the lack of skilled workers, the generative AI and the use of training. Where can an operator say go right away to get the answer that they need when they're on an overnight shift or something like that? How do they get trained? They don't have to wait for a training. They can just get anything that they need at their fingertips when they're having the right data at the right time. For them is another area that we're seeing some of this being implemented. We're coming up at the end here, Brian. I want to thank you. Do you have any other topics or anything to share?
Well, I think, just a couple comments. One, I would just encourage anyone listening to realize adoption of industrial analytics is a journey. There's no 2 paths look identical. Everyone is starting at a different level of maturity, oftentimes having quite different expectations and goals as part of that. So I would just say get started. And you mentioned the workforce turnover, and we talked about change management earlier. I think that's getting easier, and I'll use a real life example from my family. So my dad, I love him, one of the greatest engineers I've ever met. But up until a few years ago, he was still committed to his flip phone. He had not embraced technology. That just wasn't in his DNA. Then I look at my generation, and I'm more of a trust but verify. My engineering mind sees the potential and the power, but I tend to want to validate what I'm being told or the information being provided to me. And I look at my kids, it's blind trust with technology. So I think certainly the change management hurdles are going to get easier as that workforce turnover happens, as folks sort of lean into technology. I would just, my words of wisdom, all of these models are only as good as the inputs that go into them. So don't lose that engineering sort of mindset, and make sure that we're focusing on improving the front end of the process in addition to the back end of these industrial analytics processes. But exciting times, I'll just say that.
Well said, Brian. Thank you so much, and thank you everybody for listening. If you'd like to get some more information, please go to SAS.com/IoT solutions on the SaaS side. And if you want to get more information about ARC, please visit arcweb.com.